Can you guys please come on stage and take seats? Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we've got our four people. Okay, now we can start. Okay, I'd like to move us forward because we still have some really wonderful speakers and discussion to take place. And then, of course, we want to make sure that you get to eat and have your lunch discussions. So at this time, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Ben Henwood. He's a co-author of the book on Housing First, the model for that's being used at this time, and the National West Coast co-lead for the Grand Challenge on Homelessness in the area of social work, as well as the creator of the Social Work Enhanced Field Placement Project that was kicked off this year. So let me introduce.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So it's great. I wanted to talk about a pilot that we launched this year called the Enhanced Field Placement for Excellence in Homeless Services. And what I love is anytime you want to do something, if you call it a pilot, it seems like no one has an issue with it. But hopefully this is going to be something that we do year after year. And so I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit, but mainly give the students who participated in that field placement a chance to talk about it. And the pilot was designed to do two things, right? To excite people around this idea of ending homelessness, and also develop leaders who can actually enact that and make it happen. And that's as much about developing skills as it is changing mindsets. And so those were the two things we wanted to do this year. This is a group of students that were supported by the field office and their placements, and I see some of the participating placement sites here that were part of the field placement and actually attended some of our events. And these were students who got up on monthly. We met at 8 a.m. so before their field placements even began, and we met with 2 hours. And we did a variety of things. And so we talked to sort of policy experts, including Chris Coe, who was kind enough to join us. We talked to housing developers. We talked to advocates, people with lived experience of homelessness. So, and a lot of this was student driven. So a lot of each month we met and we talked about what was sort of in the interest and needs of students. These students also participated outside of those 2 hours in events such as the Homelessness Awareness Week. They helped organize that on campus. They participated in the homeless count and also in the advocacy around all the H's, Triple H and H this year. So it was an exciting year to launch this pilot. And so I'm happy to talk to you more about it after this event, or I think there's a sign-up sheet if you're interested and you want to talk or talk to any of us. We will all be here all day facilitating some of the table discussions later, so you'll have a chance to speak to these students. But essentially I wanted them, we only have 10 minutes, so I'm asking them to be brief, but just to talk for 1 or 2 minutes to some of the takeaways that from this year in their enhanced field placement. So, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Stanley V, and I'm placed with Skid Row Housing Trust. So I'm working right in the heart of Skid Row on San Pedro and 5th. And one of the things that I took away from our enhanced field placement was a forum for us all to come together to not only share techniques and skills, but also to give a real hands-on experience of what it is that we're seeing, what it is that we're witnessing, so we can see what's happening not just in Skid Row, but I can learn what's happening in Hollywood and Venice and these different communities. That was incredibly beneficial to me. Also to be able to quell some myths that might be out there. You know, walking through Skid Row, I've seen a tremendous amount that Officer Joseph absolutely beautifully helped to humanize for us, and that was one of the things that I feel that I hope that I was able to do, was to help humanize the citizens of this neighborhood, to quell some of these myths. For example, the LAPD, I have seen only respect and understanding and patience as they're engaging with these citizens, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them and for everything that they do for this vulnerable community. So to be able to share those ideas with the enhanced field placement has been very beneficial for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Toscano. I'm placed at Union Station Homeless Services in Pasadena. I think what I value the most about this group of people and being in the enhanced field placement is the experiences that they've had, that we've gotten to share, collaboratively work together, and think about the issue of homelessness throughout different parts of LA. And I really got to understand what the role of the intern was at those locations, which is really interesting, and what each of those locations valued in training and what their focus was, because we're each at different places, and each of our placements valued us learning something different and learning something important to put into practice in homelessness. Coming out of undergrad, I didn't expect necessarily to be working in homelessness because USC likes to throw curveballs, and you don't know if you're gonna be placed in a homelessness setting, but I was hoping for it, essentially because I had done it for 4 years at my undergraduate university, and that helped me, to understand and really conquer the myths about homelessness and to not be afraid to be in this field. And then I got to join these wonderful people at the enhanced field placement and learn even more and conquer more myths and understand that we're here, we're students, and we're willing to work really hard to end homelessness and to teach others and other students in our program what it is to be part of an organization that's helping in homelessness and to be at a school that's really, really helping and pushing for us to address this issue that, is falling through the cracks a lot of the time. So I really, really like these guys. And I like USC, and thank you so much. And yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alena Bess, and I was placed at LA Family Housing this year, which is all the way up in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. Anybody? Anyone? Valley, girls, boys, non-gender conforming. We had a meeting in the enhanced field placement about field safety, which I valued very much because I don't think safety is spoken about enough in social work. It's obviously spoken a lot about in the LAPD, and Officer Joseph knows all about how to be safe. But it was useful in kind of giving me tools and framing what a social worker's role is and isn't, and especially in the field. So when we're doing scattered site visits, when we're doing outreach, or even when we're not working and we're riding the train and we encounter homeless individuals all the time. For people who ride the train, Thomas is my train buddy. We take the train sometimes from class. And so the way to think about that is to think about all of the resources available in each community, all of the services. For example, countywide, the HOPE team, the Homeless Outreach Partnership Endeavor. When I learned about that and other services, I was able to kind of gain a little bit of confidence in my own safety so that I was able to help others in the field. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Sullivan. This year, I was placed at Covenant House, California, which is a shelter for transitional aged youth. I think the best part about the enhanced field placement was having a space to ask really big questions. I think a big takeaway from this year for me working in homelessness is the more I know, the more I realize I don't know anything. And so having a place where asking some really big questions is okay and encouraged, and that there are people who are working in different areas of this field to bounce questions and ideas off of was extremely valuable to me. And I think also kind of getting a little bit more policy. One of our very first meetings was with Chris Coe, and that really, I think, set the framework for me. And thinking about all the various systems that are interconnected with homelessness. Really everything is part of the system. Law enforcement's part of the system, housing's part of the system, hospitals are part of the system, employers. Like, this issue touches every sector of our social fabric. And so having a place where we could kind of throw ideas around and ask questions about how we could be doing more to make homelessness an issue that everyone is thinking about was really, really impactful for me.
So I just wanted to give you a feel for kind of the larger discussion that these students are participating in. I think it's great. To be involved in that larger discussion, I think, is part of the excitement when you realize what's involved and how many people care about this interest. And I don't know that student interns always get that. I don't know that people in the field are always aware of that larger issue. And so part of our mission here is just to develop young leaders in the field. You can hire them, though I think most people still have another year here. So these are just some examples of some of the leadership that we're developing. And so by all means, we'd like to partner with all of you and expand this as much as we can. So thanks very much. Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. I also want to share with you the story of one student very briefly who was at her internship and was waiting to see somebody and ended up going next door to get a cup of coffee at a little restaurant there. And right in front there was a homeless man sitting there. And she had about an hour until her next client, so she actually asked if he would like to join her and have breakfast, and she brought him in and they began to talk, and during that hour she just listened to him and learned about him and used all of her nice social work skills, good listening and paying attention, and talked about what of a transforming experience or transformative experience that was to have a personal interaction in that way and to listen and understand and not just walk by somebody with ignoring them or or feeling frightened or avoiding them, all of the things that people often do. And that actually brings us to our next speaker because it relates to the idea of how we think about things and why we see some of the behaviors that we see from people who are homeless that may take us aback a little bit, that are maybe a little hard to understand. So next, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Gabriel Crenshaw, or Dr. Gabe, or Gabe, whichever you'd like. He is a psychologist. He does work here in the School of Social Work. He's done a radio, TV. He's a media guy. He was named America's Best Life Changer on the TV show Extra. He's created a digital media program called Mental Minute with Gabe, which I've seen some of them and they're excellent. He's appeared as an expert on different news broadcasts, including the Oprah Winfrey Network, CNN, the Ricky Lake Show, in print, in USA Today and Huffington Post. And he's also a songwriter and an author. He's lectured through lots of places. And one of his areas of expertise is neuroscience. So he really understands the brain. He's telling me, stop doing this introduction. Okay, come on up, Gabe. I just read it from your Bible.
Don't. I'm never talking for you again. All right. Oh, geez, after that. Hey, everybody. I really enjoyed you, officer. I'm glad to be here. When Brenda asked me to do this, to consider the neurobiological concerns that can happen with homeless people, I had never really thought about it. But when I think about it, I mean, to be homeless really is a traumatic event. And so all the things that happen inside of the brain, you move to the subcortical region. You want to stay in the prefrontal cortex, but there's no way you can stay in the prefrontal cortex and see the world rationally and live on the street. And so I wanted to share with you briefly some things. But, Brenda said something, and I was not going to share this, but because she went on and on and on, let me humanize myself a little bit. I woke up one morning, and these lyrics were in my head. Too many homeless in the streets. Where's human decency? They're not all bums, you see. I know. 'Cause they used to be me. So I knew this guy, let's call him Gabe. And he wanted to go out in the world and do his own thing. And so His mom and dad let him take their Mercedes, which kind of became his, and he found himself having fun and then found himself homeless. But homelessness in Manhattan Beach is kind of sexy. And I found this place. This is a true story. I found this place. It was like Homeless Row, only it doesn't look like Skid Row. If you want to know where it is, I'll be standing over here after this, and you can come and I'll tell you where it is. But I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but I saw a Jaguar, a BMW, and just a bunch of other cars. So I thought it's a safe place for me to sleep tonight. I had a lot of pride, and I didn't want to tell anyone. I did this for 4 months, living in my car. And I remember, I thought, well, it's not so bad. I mean, I got a Mercedes, and here's a Jaguar, and here's a BMW. One night I came home, and there was a Nissan Sentra that had moved into the neighborhood. And I'm not kidding you. I went, oh, my God. It's a Nissan. Here. There goes the neighborhood. I'm not kidding you. And I thought, isn't this crazy? It's like, dude, you're living in your car. And there's a hierarchical attached to being homeless. Like, wow, So, but the interesting thing is, you know what? So I started to think about this, Brenda, and I thought, okay, I'm like, go to the next slide. That would be my job to do. There's a connection here. When you consider the role of the brain, it helps to shape and condition behavior, thought, and emotion. All right, so initially what happens to you is an adventure. I'm in my prefrontal cortex. It's wonderful. It's an adventure. I'm sort of hyper-aroused at the idea, I'm out in the world and I'm doing my own thing. And, it's not a bad neighborhood. And I can go to the beach and it's wonderful. Not a real big deal. And I always like to wash my hands when I finish using the bathroom, but it's kind of hard to do that in the car. So I figured out something, that the sprinkler systems went off at a certain time. So I could actually time my bathroom breaks. Even if it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, I knew when the sprinklers went off, and that way I could use the bathroom and then wash my hands. I didn't even have to pay water or electricity. This was good. And so you think about all of this. I did. A month passes, 2 months passes, 3 months pass. All of a sudden, the brain changes. I had never really considered it, but when I looked back into preparing for this, I thought about it. I actually went through the process of what it is when you become homeless to the point of destitution, only I didn't have to hit destitution. But even still, a college graduate, I was a college graduate by then. Everybody's laughing at my story because you see me in an Armani suit today. And we like the idea of hearing the struggle after the struggle. It's hard to walk through people in the struggle when you're in the struggle. So it's like I'm a success story. It's kind of hard to believe. But the reality is I'm probably not the only one in here. In this room, I probably am not the only one who's ever been homeless. A paycheck away from being homeless, because that's the reality. The face, what I want to do, we're talking about innovative solutions. Well, first of all, we have to not only consider the obvious characters who we identify as homeless, there's also the other side. Those are the folks who are embarrassed, that are living in their subcortical region, the amygdala, because of embarrassment, and there's a defense mechanism in place. That's what I want to speak to as well as the obvious in mental illness, because it could have happened to me, because I started to lose a bit of my grip with reality, because I am not in a normal situation. Now I'm exposed to environmental concerns that you don't think about when there's a roof over your head. So let's take a look. These are the areas that we're looking at. The prefrontal cortex. Hey, how do I hit that laser thing? I don't see a green light. Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. Prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and basal ganglia. This is movement. This is your executive functioning, your thought, your ability to make good decisions. In my case, my mother and dad would have said, your ability not to be so stupid and have so much pride not to come back home after you realize that you were homeless in a Mercedes. But it's funny how everything looks better, right, in a Benz, right? It's just sexier in a Benz. You know, I'm not really homeless. I mean, you know, I'm like, this really is LA. Everybody just, you know, drives around and, you know, it's just horrible. You know, it's like, you know, sell your Benz, you can pay rent. Right, this is reality. But this is where it happens. The emotional brain, look at this, the thinking center, the thalamus, the appraisal, the cognitive appraisals of what happens inside the orbital frontal cortex of the brain. You have the ability to make a cognitive appraisal so that you can make a different decision. You can sense if there is danger, if your faculties are working appropriately. But there's something that happens to you when all of a sudden you are exposed to elements and the vulnerabilities kick in. Your basic functioning, like eating, sleeping, breathing, all of these things stand the potential to be compromised because you're living in a compromised situation. It helps us to start to understand just biologically and neurobiologically what homeless people are actually going through. They appear to be crazy. They appear to be off-center. And that is true. But there's an organic quality to it. That once we start to understand that, I think the urgency to do something about it kicks in a little bit more because we start to understand that these are people just like us. Essentially, there really is no difference between a homeless person and a person who isn't. Worry, stress shrinks the brain. My first month, it was just sexy. And I didn't tell anybody, no friends or anything. Oh, thank you. It's a level of embarrassment, which is that's interesting because, you know, it's like that's the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for embarrassment. There's a song by Phil Collins, you know, Another Day in Paradise. Oh, think twice. It's just another day for you and me in paradise. There's a line in that he says that the woman is on the street and she says, "Sir, can you help me? It's been days and I haven't had any food to eat." He walks by as if she isn't there. And then the line says, "She's embarrassed to be there." Oftentimes when we find ourselves embarrassed, we get upset. If you've ever been involved with kids and they make fun of each other, boys tend to start to fight. Why? Because they're no longer inside their prefrontal cortex. They've moved down to the subcortical region of the brain. There's an action potential that exalts my fist against your face, and it makes me feel better because it takes the focus off of me, and now you look like a fool. You get it? The same thing often happens when we're dealing with homeless people. And so we walk past them. And honestly, I mean, let's be honest. We walk past some homeless people, they're disheveled. You know, there's an odor, etc. You know, we're not so prone to say, "Here, you want to go to Fleming's with me tonight?" Right? Because they don't belong there. There's something uncomfortable about it with us. Right? And it makes it difficult for us. We can, like you said, you know, let's just pour some money there and move on. Until it hits your house. And then it's different because you don't see yourself. I didn't see myself like the person out on the street, but essentially that was me. So, worry shrinks the brain. Consider this. This is the depressed brain, the not depressed brain. This is optimal functioning right here. Literally, your brain lights up. Neurotransmitters. There's an electrical transmission that happens at the presynaptic level. All right, it sends the message over to determine whether or not there'll be an action potential. And if it is, it sits on the receptor site called dopamine, norepinephrine, even serotonin, and you feel really, really great. That is when you're operating optimally, when things are good. Emotional regulation, what we start to see here, bipolar and schizophrenia. These are places where this is housed inside the limbic system, which is what we see with the homeless folks. And I talked about the amygdala already. It's the physiological response, it's the killer instinct. And so what we start to see when it appears that homeless people are a bit violent and aggressive, sometimes they can be because there's a level of threat that happens. And that's what the amygdala is responsible for. In its natural state, when it's operating optimally, functionally, it's good for us to have that. There is a built-in fear mechanism that we should have, and we behave appropriately. When it is compromised, and you perceive a threat, real or imagined, particularly imagined, you will still try to protect yourself. And I think that's a lot of what we see and why it's scary. Mirror neurons, and I think this is important for the MSWs and everyone to understand, all behavior is derived from a state of stress. What lies between behavior and stress is emotion. To calm stress and diminish behavior, we must understand, process, and express the emotion that is actually salient to us. But again, trauma leads to hyperarousal and dissociative responses. Over time, it then moves into, and it can be schizophrenia. Even prolonged depression can cause one to disassociate. You're cut off from your family, you're cut off from everyone. Who are you talking to? Yourself. Who's answering you? A disassociated self. And it all makes sense, right? We understand that even as sane people, every answer that comes across my head isn't a sane one. And I ain't homeless anymore either, okay? Brain structures are altered. This leads to inefficient stress coping mechanisms. Fighting, eating out of garbage cans, but that's a level of survival technique too, isn't it not? You never know what you might do until you get in that situation at a level of desperation. At all costs, the body is designed to do what protect itself. It's very Darwinistic. We're designed, we want to be here. And whatever the state is, whether it's compromised, there's a level where we actually want to be here. And homeless people are no different. Decreased hippocampal volume compromises ability to integrate various sensory inputs. And what happens is emotions in the context, you can illustrate them in a way that's rather inappropriate. I've got just a little bit more time left. Impulsive, disruptive behavior of some homeless individuals is their way of communicating underlying fear-based feelings. As a therapist, when you come across homeless folks and you're willing to do the work, and it is in fact work, it's daunting work, but it's work nonetheless. Consider this, these mirror neurons I'm talking about are formed in the temporal, occipital, and parietal visual areas, in addition to some cortical areas, largely motor. The mirror neuron is the mechanism is prominent in learning by imitation. There's something that we can do. An interaction with the homeless person, believe it or not, you can change the neuronal pathways in their brain just by the way you interact with them. You can either join in their hysteria, they see you and they approach you and you're afraid. I was coming out of Burger King one day and this homeless guy said, hey, can you give me some money? I'm homeless. It was a bad day for him to come up to me, honestly. And I said, well, tell you what, I'll buy you a burger. And he said, I had Burger King yesterday, just give me some money, I'll go where I want. I said, oh, you're not really that hungry yet then, right? My response, it matched his flippant response. What would have happened had I been calm? What if I had been present, actually listened to what the real need was, connected on a deeper level? Validate his feelings. It's no picnic out here being on the streets. Look for opportunities to join with the homeless population emotionally. Story kind of like mine. We like this. Like I said, we only want to know about the struggle. After the struggle, doesn't she look great and beautiful? How many of us would have been rooting for her if we saw her in her depressed, compromised state? This is where we have to get to. And finally, because I think we're going to hit some things, I'll leave it for question and answering. Working to rebuild relationships with the homeless people is important. Outreach programs, and I'll hit on this. We're gonna have question and answer, right? So I'll stop here, but let me just say finally, instead of prescribing medication to homeless folks like Stephen, which I'll talk about in the Q&A, what if doctors could actually prescribe a house? Yeah, I'd be homeless all over again. Can I have it in Malibu, I'm homeless. This is happening in Hawaii. They put it through legislation. I'm not kidding around. And I'll talk about why this could actually be a viable possibility. Because homelessness is not just an issue with mentally ill people. There's actually, it's a disproportionate amount of people homeless, but it's about 20-something% who are mentally ill. In our greater society, it's about 6% of mental illness that we see. But there's so much more to it than just being homeless. Rather, mental illness being associated with homelessness. It's also about low income, inappropriate housing. Some of the squalor in houses that people are given to live in is actually worse under that roof than it is out in the streets. So with that in mind, I'll stop here and I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay. This was a quick overview of an interesting topic, because I think understanding how the brain functions, what we see, and what that means for care is important. Are there questions from the audience for Gabe?
What was your catalyst that kept you from being stuck, as many people?
Going into the 4th month, I went, I'm about to lose it. And I called a friend. And I think what happened neurobiologically, I thought, I don't have to be in this by myself. Somehow the level of embarrassment and the pride ended. I didn't call mom, but I called a friend, not knowing that he had recently got a job at a real estate firm, and they had all of these houses. And he said, follow me. I'm not kidding you. And he took me to a house, I'm not kidding, in the Hollywood Hills, and I stayed there for a year. Try my life, people, it works, you know? Seriously.
Can you tell us how we can take what we know about the brain and use it to help people who are stuck in homelessness where they can't seem to get out?
Yeah, there's something that has to happen. As a therapist, you can really get lost in the, oh my God, this is so terrible for you. And what's happening is there's a level of fear, I believe. And so what you have to do is tap back into the prefrontal cortex and get them in that cognitive appraisal of the orbital frontal cortex. And what that is it gives you a different perspective in which to see. As you start to encourage people to sort of look inside themselves, because really that's where the strength is. You've got to find the strength in the internal world, because it's not in the external world. They've been out there already. And it's different levels of what happens, but you start to speak to that level of strength, and everybody has it. And the idea that mirror neurons work, your calming presence, your reassurance, your ability to help them find, and you are mimicking this kind of behavior for them, they will start to imitate that same behavior. I watched some of the officers' videos of a couple weeks ago, and just his interaction with homeless people, he is able to get something from them that seemingly some therapists can't get, because you're using the wrong tools. There are times where you have to put yourself aside. Your tool initially is this. People aren't really interested in what you know until they have a sense that you care. And when you are vulnerable and you are depressed people really see the world as it really is. And they're looking at you like, why the hell aren't you depressed? You see how bad it is out here, and, right? But there is a level that we exalt ourselves a little bit so that we can have a better decision, because we believe, like the health belief model, there's a sense here in our cognitive resources that what we see necessarily, we don't have to necessarily be moved by it. So we become emotionally vulnerable to it, thinking that we can't do anything. It's internal locus of control and external locus of control. And it all centers here in the cognitive resources. And then people feel better about themselves. And so then dopamine kicks in and other neurotransmitters and serotonin. This lifts your mood. Your neuronal pathways actually will change just at the thought of a new possibility. And it, provided that there's housing in place and a doctor that can prescribe you a good house, you know, things are looking up. But it's going to take all of that, because it's not just solely a biological phenomenon. It's going to take all of us. You know, if only the PhDs knew it, then we'd have the answer. But we need the policymakers involved, et cetera. Okay? Yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is
Thank you for being here. We'd love to see the rest of your presentation, and I'm wondering if or how this could be adapted for us to share with staff or volunteers. There's so many misconceptions and
Right.
we talked about a lot. Like, is there something that you have already done, or will you consider maybe some kind of a training program or practicing available in the future?
Yeah, I'll do it if Brenda helps me. In fact, Brenda and I have talked about actually writing an article and really getting at this, because I think the piece that is often missing, even from therapy in general, is the neuroscientific model. And it's not just because it's in vogue since the Genome Project, but the brain starts everything, right? Sensory neuron, and it sends a message to the motor neuron right into your muscles and glands. It's how we move about the world. The intention, what we're doing in here right now, is all about intention, right? To go out into the world and be impactful. But it has to start with a thought. I'm willing to do it.
Okay. We have been working on a curriculum with the city of Los Angeles. And I think it's just really important to understand that when you become homeless, the fact that you're dealing with that level of trauma and basic level of survival, that does begin to change your brain, and where you're focused is different than you would be if you were housed. And so looking at somebody and assuming that they are functioning in the same way with the same priorities, using the same part of their brain when they're not, is not as helpful as beginning to really understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and beginning to take that into account. Was there a question?
So there's been a lot of research and studies around the impact of trauma on the brain of children and even youth up to the age of 25, since we now know that the brain isn't really fully developed until 25. Right. So do you have any recommendations on any preventative measures or things that should be done for children and youth, since we also know that they can end up with lifelong health consequences because of trauma suffered when they're younger?
Absolutely. Are you guys familiar with the ACEs?
Yes.
That's huge right now, and it's kind of what we have all known. Protective factors is really what you're talking about that we put in place. It's really primary prevention instead of secondary and tertiary prevention. By the time you get to tertiary, those are the kids that the officer is picking up off the street. And so attachment is extremely important. How many Bowlby people we have here, Ainsworth people we have here, yeah? This is really important because, and Siegel talks about this in mindfulness as well, right, Siegel? Here's the issue. The emotional regulation and emotional stability happens with the caregiver. We used to traditionally say it was the mother, but it's not always the mom. And there's a resiliency that children have. I think it's important for us to remember that whenever we get the children, and no matter what state of trauma that they are in, protect your mirror neuron, right? And you want to influence them with the calm, with appropriate attachment. And they automatically start to write a new narrative. You never have to say a word to people. This is how powerful the brain is. You wonder why therapy works, outside of the fact that occipital lobe mesocipitatal lobe creates an action potential from the presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic and sit on the serotonin neurotransmitter. Outside of all that, I don't have to say a word. They walk into the room and they can just look and they feel a sense of encouragement, calm, you're with me, support, empathy, right? You ever had that happen before you began therapy?
Not always.
The neuronal pathway in their brain has already changed. Yeah. For our children, this is especially important because they don't have the same filter that adults have, so they can spot bullshit instantly, right? Yeah. So you don't try to talk them down and go in childlike mode with them. There are a lot of children that are experiencing adult traumas. You have to deal with it. If you are afraid of it and you can't deal with it, what are you doing? You are re-traumatizing the victim, okay? So that's the attachment, emotional regulation, protective factors, support, and things of that nature. And getting them to change the narrative for themselves, that where you are now doesn't mean, brain plasticity is critical here. The brain is plastic. It has the ability it's malleable. It has the ability to make and mold into anything. You start to speak life into these children. And you don't speak to their trauma. We ameliorate the trauma, but we speak life. Does this make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Brenda, I have just one quick question. Can I ask a really quick one? Is Hawaii able to bill the insurance companies?
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you what, they used they actually have used a major insurance company to work with the senator on this. And he came up with the numbers, which I have here, but if you want my PowerPoint slide, I'll give it to you, but the numbers are there. What is it, 40,000 for the gentleman that you saw there, Stephen? He had staff because he's out in the elements. 7 days later, $40,000, he's healed. But he's had this episode 21 times. It's $120,000 a year for homeless people going in and out of the hospital. It's $18,000 to buy him a house. You do the math. Yeah. Maybe not in Malibu, But you know what? You get me a house and do my thing, I can I can heal, baby. I can get to Malibu.
So I can go buy one.
I had, I believe, a wild conversation during the break with Dr. Wenzel, and I was telling her, my kids live up north, and I'm just amazed at the difference in consciousness. Up in Northern California, they're rezoning properties where people can build the granny homes and the small homes in their backyard. I said, can't we start this here? And she says, it's not, the consciousness isn't here. We were talking about the NIMBYs, who not in my backyard, they just want to protect their own property value, and that's not going to happen over on the side by the beaches where you were homeless. So we need people like yourself. I was trying to get to the point of, is there some way we could mandate those people who are so protective of their property to go to classes like DUI and domestic violence classes, where we can mandate those landlords to go to your classes and listen to you and listen to us social workers who are in the trenches and listen to Officer Joseph.
That's a radical idea. Thank you.
Mission accomplished today, right?
How are we doing with time? 2 more minutes. Okay. Are there any other questions? Does anyone have?
I have a question. So, could you speak to, so with adults, I definitely get the neuroplasticity with youth and children. Is there an age at which does the same apply to adults? Is there a certain longer window you have to work with, expectation setting for us?
Neurons continue to fire, right? So everybody listen up. There was a time when you reached a certain age, we thought it was impossible to learn anymore, right? We have adages, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's a lie. It's not true. No, what it is the old dog doesn't want to learn new tricks. But you can teach them new tricks because the brain is still there. Plasticity is not just for kids anymore. That's like an old cornflakes commercial or something, right? Orange juice isn't just for breakfast anymore. But no, you can. Which is why we see a lot of people, and get this, for even homeless people, a lot of this is their dreams have been deferred to the point where they're depressed by it, and they, things happen, life gets in the way, and everybody in this room should understand that. I don't care how much money you have, think about what it would be if you didn't have it. And all your dreams and goals and aspirations for yourself, for your family, goes to the end. But at any moment when you choose to see life differently, that's plasticity. People, it's just a thought. Sensory neuron is intention, is thought. Before you ever make a move, you have to have the thought first. Since brain plasticity works with the idea that you decide to do something different. And ultimately, it does become a choice. And even though mental illness, barring mental illness like bipolar, not so much bipolar, but schizophrenia, et cetera, and things of that nature, a lot of homeless people, like I had 4 months, right? Had I stayed in that state, well, I probably wouldn't be standing here right now. Possibly, but I was grown, right? And so the plasticity, I got a different thought. And I believe the universe just opens up to you when you get a brand new thought and brings things your way. I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
My pleasure. Was that okay?
Yeah,
I hope that was okay.
So I think that the topic here goes along with the whole concept of housing first, because before I think people are going to be able to have some changes in their brain biochemistry, they need to be in a different environment that can support that. And the housing first model gets them to a place where then they are able to reduce the level of stress and trauma and are able to think and function in some new ways. And that's why I think we've seen that technique work well. But now I'd like to introduce our final speaker for the morning, Ellen Sloan. She's the CEO and founder of SoCap Tech, which is a social enterprise startup that focused on mobile and web-based applications for nonprofits. And we've seen that in a lot of other areas, but we really haven't seen them focus so much on nonprofits. So I consider that to be one of the wild ideas we're going to look at today. Her emphasis is on bringing technology to serve those who are homeless, as well as people who are homeless themselves, and ways to make innovative apps that can make a difference. She's done a startup that related to a social collaboration mobile phone app to help people to supervise care for people with mental illness and other kinds of disabilities and other types of social enterprises. She has served on the board of the Women's Foundation of California, the advisory board for Rediff, and a partner with LA Social Venture Partners. Ellen.
Thank you very much. So let me just add to the perspective of where I'm coming from. I have 61 years of lived experience, and I worked for decades in the corporate sector, worked, as Brenda said, in the nonprofits as a board member, particularly the finance committees, because I'm an accountant and recovering accountant. And then I also have spent time in one of the considered maybe largest agencies we have, the Navy. I was a Naval Reserve officer, Supply Corps officer, so I was doing contracting. So I come at it from a number of different perspectives. And then to prove that you can teach an old dog new tricks, at age 59, I learned how to code. And so, bringing all of those perspectives together is sort of what led me here today. So I'm going to do this here. So Dean Flynn talked about the wicked problem, and certainly homelessness is a wicked problem. And all of us here are very familiar with what the stats are. And I see there are three problems that we have. One is obviously homelessness itself. And then there's two other problems from the vantage point that I sit at. One is that nonprofits that are, many of the nonprofits, most of the nonprofits dealing with this, don't have the money for the technology that is available now. All of us in this room, all the people working at the agencies have one of these. But many of the people in the nonprofits are still dealing with email, phone, and paper forms. And having sat on the finance committees and familiar with the nonprofits, there just isn't the funding for that. There's barely enough funding for operating. And a survey was done in 2014 that 3.2% of a budget is spent on technology, and that compares to 6.9% for a small business. And so the monies that are spent go to maybe, paying for the Wi-Fi and paying for the storage and things like that, and continuing the software, but not for innovative solutions that can be made for something like this. The other issue is the agencies are incredibly huge, and they have legacy software that is a rat's nest. And it's very hard to get those, large systems to move on a dime. It's a proverbial battleship. You can't change something. They're not as nimble as we would like them to be. And so with those two things in particular, both the nonprofit, the monies, and not the ability to be able to create innovative tech solutions, and then the agencies just having this behemoth, I actually do agree, more so than ever, now is the time to create innovative technology solutions. And why is it now? We have a lot of very inexpensive platforms that are available. And this is true. I ran a startup tech company in 2012 to 2015. And we spent over $100,000 to develop what's called in the industry MVP, or minimum viable product. And we had to go overseas to get that done in India. We couldn't afford the people, the people here right in Silicon Beach. It would have cost us 3 times as much. And as a nonprofit, it was incredibly expensive, but we had a funder that was willing to put that money through. We actually never got that thing funded or programmed appropriately so we could pilot it. So we have these innovative, inexpensive solutions. And one of the things that I'd like to pull up is the JOT form. So I was working on I was at a hackathon, and I highly recommend all of you to go to hackathons. In fact, there's one for foster care next weekend that if you're interested, and maybe USC could put on a hackathon around the homeless issue. Just a thought there. And I was at a hackathon, and I met Latina Jackson, who's one of the district directors at the Department of Mental Health, and she was explaining that at the Source, which is a one-stop shop at the Central Library, started at the Central Library, for the homeless to the DMVs there so they can get their ID or renew their license. DPSS is there so they can sign up for CalFresh, Medi-Cal. There's a legal clinic there so that they can get some of their tickets taken care of. They can get a TB test, things like that. That one of the issues is that each of the different agencies keeps asking for the same information. And as the officer knows, and many people know, that they carry their ID cards in a wad with a rubber band around it. And identity theft is rampant in Skid Row and other places. They either lose it, but it's most likely being stolen. And for those of us that have a credit card that's stolen or the number's stolen, you call the credit card company, they'll make it good. You lose your CalFresh, it's at least another 30 days before it can be replaced. And therefore that impacts your life more significantly. And so what we wanted to do is create an app. And you do this, a hackathon is typically Friday night to Sunday night. It's 48 hours, and yes, you do get to go home and go to sleep. But it's time limited. You have to have something that works, a pilot, MVP, minimum viable product, at the end of that time. So you're time constrained. You bring in a variety of different people. Often, before I knew how to code, I was a subject matter expert. And a business person coming in from that standpoint. So what I was able to do is we formatted what the design of the app is going to be, and then, a couple months later, we were trying to move this thing along, and I just got up in the middle of the night, and I created this app in 1 hour. 1 hour. That's how, and it's free. This is jotform.com. You can go through in Google Forms. You can do it through Google Forms. Chris talked about Google Forms when they first were exploring CES. And so there are many free opportunities. And so basically here, it's Central Libraries, today's date, which caseworker are you, client name, if we could scroll up a little bit, caseworker name, parent name. What we're trying to do, one of the other problems is that in the CES system and other systems, is that there are multiple entries for the same person. And sometimes the spelling's wrong, or because of some mental illness, they get their names wrong. So trying to find identifying factors, contact address if they have it, birth date, let's scroll up. Birthplace, sometimes that might be an identifying factor, phone number, go up. And then what kinds of ID do they have? And what kind of services have they signed up for? And then if you click one of these, let's scroll all the way up, or down, whatever, is that then you can actually copy, photograph it, which we all have cell phones, photograph it, and attach it to this file. And then the other thing we wanted to do, so this is in an hour. I was able to create this. It goes to Google Forms. It's not secure, but it's a working product. It's a working piloting product. And what you can do with this is we want to attach it to a fingerprint, a biometric feedback, which we weren't able to do with this, but there is ways in which to do that, and that gets to another opportunity, which is APIs, application program interfaces. And so actually the new HMIS system, the Clarity that the county is adopting, has biometric portion to it, and I'm really hoping that they will adopt that so that instead of carrying your wad of papers that you move on. Okay, so let's go through the next, let's see, can you click to the next slide? Some of the other advanced technologies, there's QR symbols. I was working with an agency here and talking to the caseworkers. One of the things that they wanted in order to entice the people to want to adapt it is that they have to turn in paperwork every month for the services that they've received. Well, one of the easy ways to be able to do that without tracking them, which, you know, there are issues around that, is to read a QR code. So there's a QR code for St. Joseph Center, there's a QR code for the individual, and then there's a QR code for each of the different services that they provide. And so when it's scanned by the people at the service center, then you know exactly what service they provided. It'll go through to the caseworker, so then they already have sort of a sample billing that they can bill the grant for is the type of services. And then you know that instead of you know, getting a signed form from the doctor or the center that they've actually been there. And then that frees up their time. So let's go on to, and then these are little, what we call iBeacons. This is what it looks like. It looks like a super small mouse. These are Bluetooth enabled. They cost about $20 each. Working with an agency that will be putting together housing, constructing housing for another, and a large agency has the contract for that. And they're being constructed out of shipping containers. And they don't look at all like a shipping container. But having something like this on the individual door for the person, their room, and then another one at the front door, because a lot of these, the housing is in isolated communities, that then they will be able to, you can see whether they've left the room. If they haven't left the room for 24 hours, then that's potentially a problem. Are they going out? Are they into the community? You can see if they've actually left that. You can't say, see whether they've left to go down to the liquor store, but at least you can see if they're actually moving and where they, out of the house. So let's move to the next slide, please. So what I've learned through this journey is that technology is the easiest part of this. It's adoption. It's changing behavior, which we all know. I mean, school social work and many of the other schools, it's about changing behavior. We know how challenging that can be. One of my favorite people that talks about this is B.J. Fogg. He's a professor at Stanford, and he deals with he's on the board at Rock Health, which is an incubator for tech startups, health startups in San Francisco. And he talks about the behavioral model being that behavior is between motivation, ability, and the trigger. And with the QR symbol there, the motivation was because we wanted the people to actually use the app, is to keep it on, is the motivation is if you don't have to turn in the paperwork, then that's a good thing. The ability, using a QR code is really easy. You scan it in, at the center, it makes it easier for them for billing and things like that. And so then that helps trigger the behavior that you want. One of the other things that I've learned in sort of in the tech world and the startup world is what we call lean startup. And if we can go to the next page or next slide. And so I was talking about we were talking about lean startup, and Latina, who's has a degree in social work, she goes, oh, well, that's the PDSA. And I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you guys are really actually, when people say lean startup, and this is my book here, little visual aid, I have it tabbed all over the place, is that when you build something, you're really planning and designing it. And that's what a hackathon does. You build it, you plan and design, you bring a variety of different people together. You measure it. You have to then go out and test it, study it, see whether it works, and make sure that you have a variety of different people and users. So in the case of the various apps I've done, you have the clients, or and then you have the caseworkers, potentially, and then you also have, management. So you want to make sure that they're involved in the study of that. And then you learn from that, and that it's a circular cycle. So once you've learned, one of the things I love about tech, and I wish, well, it was common when I was a biochemistry major, is failure is, you want to fail, because as long as you learn from failure. So you make something, okay, that didn't work, so you tweak it. And so that's something that this sort of system, or the PDSA, will actually help too. And so that's a circular cycle. So I'm going to close here. So next slide. So I've spent many years as an entrepreneur, project manager, sort of the ultimate project manager. I have 2 daughters, college age, one of which is a freshman here. And a software developer. And what I've learned is that you build on what is there. You don't reinvent. There's so many opportunities out there. You also conserve your resources. And somebody talked about persistence. Well, persistence and also patience. You conserve that in addition to your other resources. And then building on best practices. And it's best practices not only from your own sort of world, but other worlds. And that's why what I love about the hackathons and when you're building these sorts of things is to get people from different perspectives. So anyway, that is my presentation.
Great.
Are there any questions for Ellie?
Oh, wait, Mike's coming. Here you go. Oh, okay. Oh, over here? I saw hands.
Hi, Ellen. I'm Eric Hubbard with Homelessness, Inc. And as how do smaller nonprofits really tap into the ability to use new and emerging technologies when, on a daily basis, we're just focused on reporting to HMIS and using the basic tools of data management when there's not even necessarily funding available to really look into huge upgrades, or there's not ever really people just knock on your door saying, can you try this app to really improve your efficiency and really help you improve your outcomes?
Well, that's where forums that are like a hackathon. And there are hackathons around homelessness, there's around autism, you name it, there are various issue hackathons. And you can actually go attend those, you and your people can attend, can attend those and be the subject matter expert and actually help create an app that then could be tested where you are and go forward with that. And so I mean, I really feel the pain of nonprofits with you're wearing so many hats and you just have to keep the doors open and the services delivered and everything else is not really paid attention to. There are a lot of free resources too to get it coded. There are coding boot camps that can take it to the next level. There's also, I've worked with City National Bank and they're coding an app for the Department of Aging. I've put them together with them. And so there are, and they're doing it as in-kind services, it's their IT department. So there are free resources to be able to do that. And so again, it's, being brave enough to want to spend, some time to be able to do that. And when you're in a, confined period of time, 48 hours, it's amazing what you can get done and the energy that comes from that. And the energy of the people, a lot of times they're volunteers that will be on your team that will help carry that forward.
I have a question, I have a mic too. Are there foundations that might help organizations develop apps, like you think of like Microsoft or different, is that something you should pursue or?
Well, so the way that I've worked with the corporate foundations, especially in the tech arena, is that if we can use their tech platform. So I sort of deal with the chronically homeless, and then on the other end of the spectrum, the homeless college students. And so I have had discussions with Airbnb to use their platform to match hosts with students. And somebody talked about granny flats and stuff like that. Well, you go to the West Side, and they're 3- and 4-bedroom homes with 1 or 2 people living in them. They don't need a granny flat. There are bedrooms. I actually have a UCLA student living with me now. So again, using the nonprofit or the technology that they already have.
Wow, okay, Airbnb, I didn't think of that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Other?
The question here? Okay, just a quick question. I know when I'm out in the community, I'm wondering was there a card? Is there a number? Is there something I could tangibly sit down with somebody and give them and say, here's a resource if you want help, if that's what you're so choosing. Is there an app that you know of that's in creation that, I think of there's outreach workers at agencies, but there's only so many of them, but if there's social workers or warm-hearted people that just want to be able to give somebody a resource, are there apps or apps that people can use on their own that says, hey, I am homeless, I'm looking for resources? Is there something like that exists?
So, Denise, did you plant this?
Sorry, I was asking about my dressing. What?
So, Denise here has an amazing app called Win, What I Need. And so any of you that want to find out more about it, it's exactly what you're talking about, and it's vetted, annually to make sure the shelters and the hours and all of that stuff.
Actually, more than annually.
Okay, so Denise can tell you more. So yes, there is Win. Just, you can dial it up right now, go to the App Store, and it's there. It's amazing. So thank you for that question, Denise. That was very good of you.
Oh, well, one of the things I wanted to kind of underscore about what you were saying was the need of nonprofits to do this, which is how we pulled into the space, because I wasn't originally, like you, a nonprofit person. I was on the funding side and the policy side. However, typically, most traditional foundations don't consider technology a direct service need. So when we're all talking about wild ideas, I would like you all to consider, as you've heard about all the interesting things that can be done that Ellen has talked about, and frankly, all the things I know that we're trying to do with our app to connect homeless youth, and we're getting ready to expand into adults, to services. And right now, there is no traditional foundation funding sources because it's not considered a direct funding need. So that's something for, as Eric was talking about, for a nonprofit, that's a really important thing, and people have to start brainstorming about how to move the needle in that area if we're going to include technology as a solution.
I absolutely agree.
Okay, well, let We conclude with that for our speakers, and thank you, Ellen. That was very interesting and brings a whole different perspective to the table for solutions. Thank you so much.
So you're the facilitator.
Okay, as you can see, it's lunchtime. Now, hopefully you have created your rainbows at your table. And now it's time to run with it. We want you to get wild and innovative. Please pull out the discussions questions page from your packet, and each table will begin to talk together. And there should be somebody at each table that is helping to facilitate, but every single person is going to be their own recorder. We want you all to note down what it is that you think is important, and fill in your sheets and turn them in before you leave. We want to compile your ideas. So go ahead, enjoy your lunch, and we will actually be concluding before 12:30, so about 12:25. And I want to thank you so much. I'll just say goodbye to you right before we send you on your way for the day. But thank you all for your participation to this point.
Facilitator. So I think I've got that process pretty much under control, but we'll go around and make sure everybody has a facilitator. Enjoy lunch.